Well, hello, students. This Today we're going to be talking about the first two objectives in this particular section, if you're following along with your book, and that is to discuss why diversity is important to organizations and to describe and provide examples of different types of diversity. So let's go right into the first objective, and that is why diversity is important to organizations. So essentially, the first topic is putting two things together, and they are interrelated: diversity and communication. So there are two facets of diversity: generational diversity and gender diversity. When we talk about gender diversity, that's really going to focus more on communication. So we ask the question, why communication is linked to diversity? Well, the reason is it's linked to diversity because different cultures, different orientations, different values, which we've talked about extensively, all have different ways of communicating with one another. For example, in many cultures, words are taken literally, right? And especially in the English language, we have words that we're saying one thing and mean something else, but they sound the same. Like we could say beer. That could be the beer we drink. It could be that um, that the tree is bare because it has no leaves on it. It could be beer with me, okay? And so many different things that it could mean, but translated literally in a diverse culture, many things, including adding body language, mean many other things. So, what we're really going to talk about in this section is the context of contemporary communication and why information literacy is so important. So, the first thing, as your book points out, and you can go to figure 11 1, effective communication requires targeting a message in different ways. It all depends on what your audience is. So, looking at figure 11 1 on page 387, that provides an overview of the subtopics in the summary. So, on the left arrow, you have benefit types and generational gender. In the right arrow, here's the integration of communication, where you have models of communication, challenges in contemporary organizations, information literacy, targeting a message, and then storytelling. So take a minute after you look at 11 1, stay on there, and then look at diversity. And quite blankly, it talks about describing similarities and differences among people. But the idea is, do you value your judgments over what other people are thinking? Do you take into consideration that when you process your information, that you do acknowledge and accept the fact that there are differences in backgrounds, differences in experience, and the different, which your book points out, the different perspective of how people, I should say, the different perspective of how they process things and then play them back. So if we don't understand diversity right up front and we don't accept that it exists, we are not going to be able to respond to change, and we're not going to be able to adapt. And I think that's really important, that we need to get on the same page in different environments or situations, especially if we're dealing with global organizations. So your book talks about, number one, your ability to respond to dynamic changes and how to adapt, but it also talks about considering a wider range of perspectives when making decisions. You have to have more autonomy, more understanding before you make a decision and come to a conclusion. And that leads to the next thing, which is to promote a culture of fairness. And I just mentioned that, but your book states it very clearly. As organizations become more global, they have diversity, background, experience, and values. Everyone's values become important, and you need to take that into consideration. Diversity isn't always something that's negative. Diversity is understanding or experiencing situations in three different ways. And your book points it out. Diversity improves how well organizations learn and change. Diversity creates access to and legitimacy for organizations among different stakeholders. And three, diversity promotes fairness to underrepresented groups. So let's talk about the first one. Diversity improves how well organizations learn and change. So diversity improves not only our understanding of each other's cultures and values, but it gives us broader perspectives, refreshing ways to look at how we make decisions and the mental gymnastics we go through when we make those decisions. Looking at things in multiple perspectives is so important because when we put everything in a template and we don't have the ability to think out of the box, we stifle innovation and creativity. The second thing is diversity creates access to and legitimacy for organizations among stakeholders. So stakeholders realize anyone working in the organization, even using the formal organizational grid, they have a diverse workforce that can adapt to a lot of different things. Again, especially if we're looking at global type organizations. So we call this, and your book states, it's the access legitimacy benefit, when a diverse workforce helps the organization to gain access to a broader set of stakeholder groups. But this makes the organization richer in practice and in thought, both internally and externally. It's always very good to have a workforce, a sales workforce, that has a diverse population. They can relate to different cultures that they are selling their products or services to. And finally, diversity promotes fairness to underrepresented groups. Now, when we talk about that, that's so important. When we talk about diversity, a lot of it is largely based on ethical and moral principles. And traditionally, certain groups and diverse populations have not had upper level positions of power in the organization, in the traditional organizational grid. So the idea is, how do we move people up in the organization, especially in a global environment? This also includes women. When you look back in the early 1990s, females did not have a big stake in Fortune 500 companies. The number of executive positions for women was much lower than they were with men. So that balance of power from the 1990s up until 2014 and beyond have changed. There have been more female CEOs in Fortune 500 companies than ever before. And also, diversity helps look at different perspectives and backgrounds, better ways of solving problems. Diverse workforces ultimately lead to more creative problem solving. And when you have more creative problem solving, you have more of a dynamic process where better and more valued decisions are made. Also, it increases the opportunity for interpersonal relationships within the organization. Okay, this will end phase one of today's lecture.